All right, so picture this. It's 19th century, right? Guyana. Sugar plantations everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Slavery's been abolished, but the Brits, they still need people to work those fields.
Right.
So where do they turn? India.
Of course.
Yep.
Huge labor pool.
Exactly. They promise them like a better life, a chance to start fresh. Sounds kind of like an adventure novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you dig deeper, especially into the lives of the women who made that journey, it gets way more complicated than any storybook's going to tell you.
It really does. It's fascinating stuff. We're diving into the world of South Asian women in colonial Guyana, specifically during that indentured labor system, 1838 to 1917, right?
That's the one. And thankfully, we've got some incredible excerpts here from, Kalapani Studies on South Asian Diaspora,
Yes.
which is going to give us that close-up on their experiences that, honestly, a lot of histories miss.
For sure.
So first things first, we're not talking about some, uniform group of women here.
Oh, absolutely not.
They came from all walks of life back in India.
All walks of life. Imagine this. You've got Hindus, Muslims, folks from totally different regions of India, north, south, the whole mix. And the British, they might have seen them as this one big labor source, interchangeable.
As a bunch of workers.
Exactly. But the reality, way more divided. Like the book breaks it down. A significant portion of these women, lower castes.
Okay.
Dalits, Chamars, Dangars, the list goes on. These women were already up against it back in India. Poverty, limited opportunities, and that rigid social hierarchy,
Yeah, right. So you can almost see how, heading off to a whole other part of the world might have seemed, I don't know, appealing.
I think so, yeah. It's like, even if it's hard work, even if the future's uncertain, it might have still felt like a step up from the what they were facing back home.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the widows. Society, man, they were especially tough on widows, so for them, emigration might have been the only way to get a truly fresh start.
Right, a chance to, reinvent themselves, maybe. But I gotta say, even if it was a step up from what they left behind, those ships to Guyana, I'm picturing, cramped conditions, rough sea.
Oh, you're getting there. But think even tougher than that.
Really?
Disease was rampant. Sanitation barely existed.
Oh, yeah.
And the death rates, especially among women and children, tragically high. Just imagine the courage it took to board those ships, knowing what you might be facing.
That's incredible. And then on top of all that, they had to deal with those emigration depots in, what was it, Calcutta and Madras?
Calcutta and Madras,
Yeah.
before they even set sail.
Jeez. It wasn't bad enough already.
It really adds insult to injury. The book doesn't sugarcoat it, It paints a very bleak picture of these depots.
Oh, yeah.
Overcrowded, no privacy to speak of, and disease everywhere.
Sounds just awful.
It's like you're being herded through these places, poked and prodded in these medical exams that probably felt more like, I don't know, inspections than anything else.
Yeah.
And the whole time you're battling this fear of the unknown.
Yeah, totally. It's like even before they left India, the system was already trying to dehumanize them.
In a way, yeah. And what makes it worse, they were often met with conflicting information. Rumors about what awaited them in Guyana.
So that just adds to the anxiety.
Totally. And this feeling of being swept along by forces they couldn't control, that comes up a lot in these women's stories.
It's like they had no agency.
Exactly. And Kalapani tells this really powerful story of Maharani, an indentured Indian widow. Her experience it really exemplifies all of this.
So this Maharani, what does Kalapani tell us about, her actual experience?
Well, her own words, they're really something. She says, and I'm quoting here, people putting bartikara, bound or indenture, ise chinichale, so sugar, going Tapu Island, Tapu me sarabar ana, make 25 cents.
Wow.
That's it.
So they're basically telling her, you're going to go sift sugar on some island for, pennies.
Pretty much. And that's all the information she had. She didn't even fully grasp where she was going or what to expect when she got there.
It's like being thrown into the deep end without even knowing how to swim.
Exactly. And this whole thing, right? This lack of agency, this feeling of being controlled by forces beyond her. It's a constant theme we see in a lot of these women's stories.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And there's actually this really vivid scene in the book where Maharani's about to board the ship. And the fear is just palpable.
Oh, totally. She says, when he coming ship, everybody going inside and dem people watching it, telling me not to go, not to go. Everybody watching in window like me and all watching. All dem people and all watching. Jahaj de far dem saying not to go, de shaking hands so not to go.
It's like even the people who were staying behind, they knew, what these folks were heading into.
Absolutely.
There was this like unspoken understanding of the hardship.
And think about it, right? They're leaving behind everything familiar their whole lives. They're risking it all for this uncertain promise.
Right.
And yet, all around them, these warnings, these pleas to turn back.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the desperation of their circumstances.
Totally. And to think, this whole harrowing journey.
You're just the beginning.
Right. I mean, once they got to Guyana, to those plantations, a whole other set of challenges awaited them. So they've made it through this brutal journey. They arrive in this new land. What's the, like, reality check that hits them when they get to these plantations?
Well, if they were expecting some kind of paradise, definitely in for a rude awakening. Plantation life. Brutal. Back-breaking work from sunrise to sunset. Punishments were harsh.
It doesn't sound much better than what they left behind.
Right, and there's this constant surveillance, this feeling of being watched all the time. But what I find really interesting is how the whole gender imbalance played out.
Right. Because we talk about how there were far fewer women than men on these plantations that, like, work in their favor at all.
You know, it's a classic double-edged sword.
How so?
On the one hand, because they were so scarce, they were in high demand as wives. They had, I guess you could say, a degree of choice in who they married, which wasn't always the case back in India.
So in some ways, it gave them more power.
In a way, yeah. But, and this is important, this whole concept of bride price, it became a huge, huge deal. Families started seeing their daughters as like commodities to be traded, and young girls were being married off for a price, often to older men.
So instead of finding freedom, they just became like...
Commodities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awful.
And child marriages, which, you know, already happened back in India, they became even more common in Guyana.
Because of this whole bride price system?
Yeah, exactly. It put a price tag on these young girls, you know? So while their scarcity gave them some leverage, it also made them vulnerable to a different kind of exploitation.
It's a vicious cycle. And I hate to even ask, but given everything we've talked about, was there also, you know, exploitation from the European overseers? I mean, I think we can guess the answer, but...
Sadly, yeah. I mean, the power dynamics on these plantations, they heavily favored the Europeans. And the sources are pretty clear. Sexual exploitation of women was a widespread problem.
It's important to remember, though, that not all members of the South Asian community were, like, complicit in this, right?
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the Europeans either. Kalapani talks about how South Asian men, you know, often driven by those same patriarchal attitudes that fueled the caste system back home, they were also perpetrators of violence against women.
Yeah. It's like oppression can come from anywhere, even within communities that have faced, you know, tremendous hardship themselves.
Exactly. And it makes those stories of resistance all the more powerful.
Because even in the face of all this, these women, they did not just sit back and take it.
Oh, absolutely not. These were not passive victims. They resisted in so many ways, you know, trying to claw back some sense of control.
Okay, so how did they resist? What were they doing?
Well, it ran the gamut, right? You had everything from like individual acts of defiance to like full-on collective action. Women would run away from the plantations knowing they could be caught and punished severely.
Yeah.
They'd refuse to work, you know, directly challenging the whole system. And sometimes they even incited uprisings.
Wow. Are there any, like, specific stories of resistance that stand out to you from the research?
Absolutely. Kalapani tells this incredible story of a woman named Salamea. In 1903, she was working on the Friends plantation in Berbice, and the conditions were just, you know, abysmal.
Yeah. And
And she did something pretty amazing. She basically rallied her fellow workers to fight back.
really? She just stood up and said, enough is enough.
She did. A driver from the plantation actually recounted the whole thing, and I'm quoting here. "I know a bound coolie woman named Salamea. I heard that she told her shipmates on the Thursday to go fight. She was at Friends before, and she went to Calcutta and returned to Friends. Salamea, I hear, urged the coolies who had assembled to fight."
Wow. So they listened to her? They actually rose up?
They did. I mean, think about that, right? This woman, she stood up to the entire system and demanded better treatment.
She sounds like a total badass. So what happened? Did it work? I mean, what became of Salamea?
Unfortunately, the book doesn't go into the aftermath of that particular event or tell us what happened to her, but her story, and all the others like it, they highlight something really crucial. These women were not powerless. They refused to let their oppression be the only story. They fought back, even if it meant putting themselves in incredible danger.
It's like a testament to the human spirit,
Yeah.
right? Even in the darkest times, there's this, like, unquenchable desire for freedom and dignity.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the women who were pushing back. Kalapani mentions a man named Bichu. He was Bengali, arrived in 1894,
Right.
became a vocal advocate against the exploitation of women.
Wow. So even within this incredibly oppressive system, there were these, like, glimmers of hope, of people, recognizing the injustice and trying to change things.
Absolutely. And those glimmers of hope, they become even more significant when we look at what happened after indentureship officially ended in 1917.
Right. Because that wasn't the end of the story, was it? What happened to these communities once they were, like, no longer bound by those contracts?
Well, it gets pretty complex. East Indian communities, they start establishing themselves more permanently in Guyana.
Okay.
They moved away from those plantations. They started creating their own villages, their own towns.
So it's like they're building a new life for themselves.
Exactly. But, and this is important, this new phase, it also saw the reemergence of some familiar patterns.
Like what? What kind of patterns?
Well, particularly when it came to, like, social hierarchies.
You mean even though they were thousands of miles away from India, even though this whole system of indentureship was over, those ingrained cultural and social structures?
They found a way to reassert themselves.
Wow. Like, how much does it take to actually break free from those cycles?
Right. It really makes you think about the power of tradition. And it raises these questions about, the cyclical nature of power dynamics.
So even when people are given this chance for a fresh start, for a clean slate, those deeply rooted patterns.
They have a way of resurfacing.
Yeah. And what did that mean for the women who had fought so hard for their freedom? Like, did they find any real equality in this new era?
It's complicated. Some women, they definitely thrived in this new environment, but a lot of them, they found themselves right back in the same fight, navigating the same restrictions of patriarchy.
It's like they escaped one system of control only to end up in another.
Unfortunately, yeah. Kalapani talks about how caste distinctions, they started popping back up.
Oh, no.
And religious leaders, especially those from the upper castes, they gained more influence.
So it's back to those traditional roles?
Pretty much. Women as wives, mothers, caretakers. And with that came this renewed focus on controlling them, their behavior, their choices, even their bodies.
That's heartbreaking. After all they went through, all that they endured, it just feels like a missed opportunity for real, lasting change.
It does, but it's also a reminder that, progress isn't always linear.
Yeah.
There are always going to be setbacks, times when it feels like we're moving backward, but it's in those moments that we often see the seeds of new resistance being planted.
Okay, I like that. So even though indentureship has ended, the fight for equality, for recognizing these women and their experiences, it's not over.
It's far from over. And that's something I really want our listeners to grasp, the legacy of indentured labor, the way it intersects with gender, with caste, with power. It continues to shape Guyanese society today.
It's a reminder that history isn't just something in a textbook,
Oh, definitely not.
It's alive, it's evolving, and it's directly connected to the things we're still dealing with today. So we're talking about a society, like, figuring itself out, right? Dealing with this past, trying to, forge a new path. Did things get better for these women?
Well, it's not a simple answer, History rarely is. Kalapani does highlight some really inspiring stories of women who, bucked the trend, carved their own way.
Okay, yeah. Let's hear about those stories. Who are these amazing women?
So one name that really stood out to me, Esther Sewak Mahadeo, born in 1872, widowed, young, 4 kids.
Oh, wow. Talk about having the deck stacked against you.
Right. But this woman, force of nature, she used her business savvy and became a hugely successful merchant in New Amsterdam.
Get it, Esther? That's incredible.
Right. But she didn't stop there. She became the first female president of the Burbis Chamber of Commerce.
No way.
Oh, yeah. A true trailblazer. And get this, huge advocate for workers' rights. Even held leadership in the Burbis Turf Club.
Are you kidding? That's amazing. She was unstoppable.
Right. It's like she took every challenge life threw at her and just leveled up, became even stronger, even more determined.
Such an inspiration. But even with these amazing individuals, those bigger issues, those deep-seated power dynamics, they didn't just disappear, did they?
You hit the nail on the head. Kalapani doesn't shy away from that at all. Things were changing, yeah, but the shadows of the past, the legacy of indentureship, of caste, of patriarchy, they were still there.
So how do we wrap our heads around that? These amazing stories of success, but at the same time this ongoing reality of inequality.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I think it's something our listeners should sit with. Kalapani gives us this window into a specific time and place.
Right.
But the themes, migration, power, identity, resilience, those are universal, you know?
That's so true. It's like those echoes, those struggles, they're still happening today, not just in Guyana, but everywhere.
Exactly. And that's the thing about a deep dive like this, right? It's not just about, like, digging up forgotten stories. It's about connecting those stories to right now, to the fight for social justice, for a better world.
It reminds us that history isn't just like stuff that happened a long time ago.
Oh, it's way more than that.
It's alive. It's got something to say about who we are today.
100%. And by, engaging with these complicated histories, hearing those voices that have been silenced for so long, that's how we start to dismantle the systems that don't serve us anymore. That's how we build a better future.
That's such an important message. So, to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. What are the untold stories in your own backyard? And how can those stories help us create a more just and equitable world? Keep asking questions, keep digging, and keep talking about these issues.
Because history isn't over. It's a conversation that we're all a part of. And we need to make sure those voices from the past are heard loud and clear.
So well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the lives of South Asian women in colonial Guyana. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning.